So welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in this week's episode, I'm joined by Amy Yoder, CEO of Anuvia Plant Nutrients. They're an innovative AgTech company who are creating bio-based plant nutrients that reduce greenhouse gases whilst promoting the circular economy. And I've got to know Amy pretty well over the last few years. And Amy, look, thank you so much for sparing the time and coming on the show today.
No problem, Simon. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. So let's take it all the way back, Amy. To a young Amy. I'm interested in the early influences. As you were kind of growing up, as it were, that kind of, I suppose, helped shape some of your ideals.
Sure. Really my early influences was my dad. So I grew up, I'm sixth generation farmer. I grew up on, at the time when I was there, a small farm that did dairy cattle and then row crops. And, my dad was probably a really big influence in my life and really talked about how he wanted to take care of the land for the future generations so that the generations after him could continue to farm the same land that our original immigrant forefathers did when they came from Ireland. So, and I would say that was really a big influence for me in terms of going into agriculture when I went into university and then continuing a career as I exited.
Great. Tell me, 6 generations back, where does that come from? What kind of year, do you trace that?
So it would have been in the 1830s,
wow.
Around there, like late 1830s. And then, it was an Irish immigrant, came to central Michigan, acquired a certain amount of land to set up sheep farming because that's what he had done in Ireland. And I chuckle because I've been to Ireland, 4 or 5 times. And every time I land where we're from around that Shannon area, right around in there, it looks the same as central Michigan. So don't tell me people don't look for exactly what they were used to. It looks the same, rocky and hilly.
Absolutely. And tell me, so it was the same piece of land that,
Yeah, it is. So, it's expanded, of course, since then, but the original land that he acquired is still in the farm. Yep.
Right. Okay. And tell me, growing up, you probably helped him and worked on the farm, but was there any view that you were going to kind of take that over or join the family business?
It was really interesting because I think it could have went either way. So my brother is the one that actually farms, my younger brother. I was the first one that went into agriculture, and I actually liked the industry part of it a little bit more. And we all of us were I wouldn't say forced. I would say it was so strongly suggested that we all take a career outside of the farm before we decided. And I started my career and actually worked for DuPont Chemical. And I worked a little bit on the R&D side, and I liked that, right? That was finding different tools and different solutions for farmers. And so personally, I chose to stay there. And I can remember coming back, and I was much older then. And I just said to my dad, I said, look, I'm all about if Craig wants to do the farm, he can do that. And I will continue my career in agriculture in a different venue. So that was pretty easy.
Oh, that was great. It sounds like you had a lot of flexibility to make those choices rather than having to follow in,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, great. Well, look, you've had a fabulous career, right? So maybe kind of, I don't know, as you look back through your career, maybe outline a couple of kind of, I don't know, positions or jobs you've had that you really kind of reflect back fondly on.
There's actually a couple. So when I started my career, as I said, I started with DuPont. I actually started in R&D when I was working still at university. So that was a little bit of the learning about putting new products and new technologies into the field. So you got to work with them about anywhere from 4 to 5 years before they actually were launched. So I really liked that, right? I liked finding new solutions in those pieces. Then I moved into the sales piece and from DuPont, and then eventually over to Monsanto. And I did that for quite a while. But I think for me, the real kind of trigger point for me was, I was driving around, and at that time I was working for Monsanto, and I kept thinking, what do I want to do long term with my career, right? And And what I really wanted was an opportunity to be able to make a difference and to do something a little bit different, where I could have a bigger impact on a lot more people. And so it was really after that standpoint, I became a little bit more deliberate with my career choices. And so I was looking at trying to gain as much experience as I could during this time frame. So I'm 30, right? And at this time, I'm thinking I'm extremely old, which I just chuckle at now. I would give my right arm to go back and be 30. But I was actually given the opportunity to work for a distributor and really start a company. And so that was the first one I actually worked on starting. So it was a distribution business in focused on forestry and turf management. So kind of not traditional ag, a little bit on the outside. And what I was intrigued about it was I would learn a little bit about how distribution works. In other words, moving products to the customer from the manufacturer, which I had always done. And from the big company perspective, you always get to execute what somebody else tells you. This was a little bit of a smaller company, so the decisions were more my decisions. And so that was really my first role. And actually what I did is I put together 3 different organizations. I did 2 mergers and then a joint venture. And then what I was able to do is in that time frame build a company that was probably around 30 million when I first started. It was over 120 million within a 2 or 3 year time frame. And so that taught me a lot. One is I was really young. There's a lot I didn't know. I thought I knew a lot, but I really didn't. And, I learned it's okay to be, I call it intelligent stupid. So meaning you can ask good questions and people will help you and they'll be more than happy to, as long as you don't come across arrogant, you genuinely want to know and are interested, people will help you along. And I had a lot of people that I worked with at that time frame that really helped us be successful. And that distribution business was very, very successful. And then we ended up folding it into what is now Nutrien. At that time was UAP. In like 2005. So that was really a big inflection point for me.
Great. Absolutely. And you seem to have worked like quite broadly across the value chain, right? So you've worked for brands, you work for chemical providers. I mean, you seem to have a kind of real kind of breadth and depth to where your experience has been in your career.
Yeah, no, you're right. And like I said, that was really part of the deliberate thinking that I had early on, which was to gain as much experience as I could in different avenues. Because I think all those they all translate, they all touch each other. And so understanding all of the pieces are really important because after the UAP Timberland, which was the last company I talked about, I actually went to a company called New Farm, which was just starting in the US at that time. And that was when generics were big and people were trying to understand how that worked. And for me, that was my first time working for a company outside of the US. So it was based in Australia. So different set of values and the way that they think about things from a culture standpoint, as well as, they were kind of the new kids on the block. So how you kind of fight into that. And that gave me a different skill set altogether. So each decision's been deliberate and each one's been, how do I build my skill base so that I have that kind of broad base?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So, so agriculture it seems like it's changed an awful lot over the last kind of 20 years or so, 15, 20 years or so. And I'm just curious as to where we survey kind of the world of agriculture now and some of the kind of dynamics going on within it. What have been the biggest changes as you look back at your career, would you say?
To me, there's been a tremendous amount of change. So when I started was really before, it was before all the genetically modified. So we didn't have any of that, right? So, I mean, that was when you would talk literally about your hybrids, your fertility, and and then using your crop protection products. And like I said, when I grew up on a farm, my dad was really big into rotation of crops. We had a big rotation in crops. It wasn't just corn and soybeans, because he believed in putting in, different crops to be able to break up the cycle and from that standpoint. So he was one of the first farmers that went to no-till because we have a heavy clay type soil. He was interested in some of the benefits and helping from the soil standpoint. And so it would have been like in late 90s, early 2000s, he kind of converted over. And so those are things I learned from him. And what I then, I've went through that stage to the genetically modified stage. I remember when people didn't think that would work. And now it sits on, at least in the US, 90% of the corn and probably 95% of the beans. So it's almost all of that. And then what I find really interesting is I almost find it coming back a little bit, right? So as we're talking now about greenhouse gases, carbon back into the soil, and if you really listen to what people are saying, they're talking about cover crops, they're talking about no-till, right? Which are all some of those basic concepts that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Now they're seeing the benefits of those and where that goes, and the diversity of cropping, right? Not having a monoculture of cropping year in, year out. And so I find it, as with everything, I think things cycle through, right? Our technology's gotten better in terms of just our overall genetics. So we can now do these kind of things and still produce the food we need to for a growing globe.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me though, with something like soil health, it's something that I hear so much of, over the last, few years. And was that always an emphasis, for instance? Was that always, is that a relatively new thing, or would you,
I think as we get more advanced, we actually learn more, right? So I think everybody realized the soil's, it's not a dead thing, but it was like secondary, right? So you're thinking about how to make that plant healthy, right? And we've done, like I said, we have some of the best genetics now. We track exactly what we put on. And then you really start to understand, and now people are really starting to understand the soil, that it's actually, it's not just a living thing, but there's a lot of different components of it. And so that microbiome is now, as we get more biologic and we start really thinking about the biologicals and the impacts of those. And we've seen that with early work on some of the different biostimulants, that if you see some of that activity in the soil, helps root systems of plants, which overall increase their health, which makes them have more vigor, which makes them be less susceptible to disease. And so, it's starting to put all of those pieces together and really thinking about it as a system rather than just one crop in a year. And I think that to me it's always been there. It's just something that you walked on every day and no one really thought about it. And now, as you're really thinking about its impact and the time that it takes to build soil, right? It takes, like, I remember from my soils classes, like 33 1/3 years to get like a millimeter of soil, right? So you can't afford to waste it, right? So you have to be really judicious about making sure that you have the right characteristics in order to continue to grow the food that we need to do on a limited amount of land, because we don't want to increase the land.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that must have been one of the main attractions for you joining kind of Anuvia, as it were. And
yeah, for me, Anuvia, the real trigger behind it was, as I said before, I always wanted to do something that really had a long-lasting impact and an impact on agriculture. And so, when I finished with Arista Life Sciences and we sold that business to Platform, I really wanted to do something different and I wanted to do something meaningful. I got an opportunity to look at a variety of different technologies during that tenure. And there was many of them that I thought would work, but nothing that would work on broad scale ag. And what I mean by broad scale, I mean on row crops that's going to work not only in the US and North America, but in Europe and in Asia and South America as well. And so when I saw the Anuvia technology and was introduced to it, it was one of the first technologies that I saw that I said, look, a farmer can utilize this. I can see how this can work. I can see how we can do it on a broad scale. And I can see how it can impact all geographies. And so that was what really interested me and why I joined.
Got it. Great. And so tell me a little bit about the mission and the vision of the company, and maybe outline some of the problems that you hope to solve.
Sure. So, I mean, the real mission behind the company is to make large-scale agriculture more sustainable. That's what we talk about all the time within the organization. And how we do that is we actually make a bio-based plant nutrient. So what that means is we make a fertilizer product that has a similar nutrient construct to commercially conventional fertilizers today, but we have a biological base. So, and what that biological base does is actually holds those nutrients, and we call them like a docking station in what we call our organic matrix. And what that allows it to do is the plant can utilize those nutrients over time. The advantage of that is you're not leaching nutrients into the soil or through the water systems. And then you're also not getting that nitrous oxide conversion from nitrogen for greenhouse gas into the air. And so they stay where they need to stay and the plant can use them efficiently. And because they're biologically based, we actually put a food source for all those microbes in the soil that I talked about a little bit earlier in that soil zone in a way, in a way, I guess, that they can feed on them very efficiently. And so what that does is that actually increases that microbial population. That in turn helps your soil health continue to grow, because soil is grown by microbes eating, dying, living, eating, dying, right? That cycle. And so by doing that, you really contribute to that healthier soil.
Okay, great. It sounds and is there a circular economy play there as well in terms of the kind of feedstock that creates the bio-based solution, as it were?
It is. So this is one of the things that I think is pretty intriguing. And actually it goes back to what you remember if I said before, everything cycles, right? Yeah. So if you think back to like when my grandfather farmed, right? So we had dairy cattle. So we'd spread the manure on the land. They would plow the land, plant it, because that was adding that manure back into the soil, because the microbes eat that. They break that up and it turns into basically their food source. It takes about a year for that to happen naturally. We actually do that quicker. And so what we do is we take organic waste, and by organic, we mean something that is biological in nature. So it could be a manure, it can be a food waste from a plant, it can be a biological waste like peanut hulls, something that came from there, yeast, a variety of different waste materials. We can take those are our base, and they go through our technology. We add nutrients to them. They're the binding mechanism, and then we put it in a granular form so farmers can utilize it like they normally would.
Okay, that sounds great. And I'm thinking about the benefits to the farmer, for instance, in terms of, the compared to other fertilizers, for instance. How would this compare on, compared to others?
Sure. From an agronomic side, when you look at compared to conventional, there's two really key things. One is the nutrient efficiency, like I just talked about before. I mean, that nitrogen really just stays where it needs to stay. It has that slow release component, which helps feed the plant over a longer period of time. The second piece is really that soil health, or that biobase that we feed those microorganisms. And then what farmers have been seeing is utilizing this. They've been seeing a 5 to 7% increase in yield. So what they've been seeing is a return on investment where they actually have more yield if they use the same amount of fertilizer, or they have the ability to use less fertilizer. And both of those are good economically for farmers and the planet.
Great. It really does seem like a win-win situation here, right? In terms of, there's a better yield, it's less harmful in the environment, as it were. And, it seems like a real novel bit of technology, as it were.
It really has been. And I think you can see that in terms of the rate of the adoption. So when I started with the company was late 2015. And so we launched our first product in 2017. And so I've worked through development over the past 3 years. We're on over 1 million acres now, and we've just moved to a really big scale-up facility that we are just in the process of finishing commissioning on.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. So it's 1 million acres basically. And where would the goal be, for instance? Where could you see in terms of the scale up and the growth? Where do you think, in your ideal situation in say 5 years time, how many acres could you be on?
I think in 5 years time, I'm looking that we're at least on 20 to 25 million. And what I'd really like is to have an operating facility in another geography on the globe. I think this has a beautiful fit for Europe, I think it has a really nice fit for Asia, and also for South America. As I said, it can be used on every crop. It can be used in a way that farmers are used to utilizing fertilizers today. But my objective in 5 years would be at least 20 million acres and to be operating in another geography.
Great. Okay, so that sounds like very exciting, very exciting time. And what about the route to market? Because I've seen you've had a couple of strategic partnerships with some of, with certain companies actually. So I'm curious, how do you bring this to market? What's the most effective way?
So we have, because it's a bulky product, so it's a granular product, we have to work through traditional distribution. They have the warehousing and the logistics to be able to move it to the farm. We have a marketing agreement in the United States with Mosaic, who's one of the large fertilizer manufacturers. They market our 10S product as Sustera. And so we manufacture it and then they market it in the US as that. And we're open to that's how we're going to grow. We're a small company. I'm not naive, right? I wish I don't have the resources that the larger companies do. So us working partnerships actually is very beneficial from our perspective. We've also had a working arrangement with Smithfield Foods in terms of working as we get this full-scale plant up and running, which will probably be in the next couple of months. We'll start to work with them on being able to take their hog manure. So we can take their hog manure as a feed source, and then that allows them not to be having to dispose of it like they had to just on the land. So we can actually repurpose that, and it becomes the biological base for our fertilizer moving forward.
Great. Dispose of that.
Pardon, Simon, you cut out on me just a tad.
No worries. How would they normally dispose of that then, for instance?
The way they would normally do it is they just straight apply it to the land, but there's limits on what they can do in timing that they're limit. For example, in Europe, we talk about this quite a bit and why it would be a nice fit. You have a lot of food waste recycling there where, they take the food waste, then they'll use it in digestate for like bioenergy, but then there's a waste product from that, right? And they can only put it on the land at a certain time frame. So once that time frame is done, or if the weather conditions don't permit, they just have to hold it. And they have to keep holding it until they can use that. We can use that at all times, right? And then we actually repurpose it into something that can be put on the land at the appropriate times from a fertility perspective. So, my vision is being able to take those kind of wastes where it's really a challenge or a problem for other companies and being able to utilize that as part of our solution.
Great. And so it really can apply outside of the US as well. It seems like there's a real addressable opportunity and market outside of the US for this.
Yeah, I think so. I really do. I think that, people are just starting to learn about us and learn about our technology. And I think as that becomes more widely known, then we'll start to see where it can really fit in as we go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. That is that really is very good. And tell me, so it must be very different working for an early stage. If you look at your career and then joining Anuvia, pretty much I think a startup when you
Yeah, joined. I was like the 5th employee, I think.
Wow. So different. Thinking about the journey, because you've worked for different size organizations, as well during your career. Well, what's been the real kind of difference as a leader, really taking such an early stage or joining such an early stage company?
That's a really good question. I think this is where being jack of all trades and master of none has been really helpful, because I have actually got the opportunity to play in a variety of different areas with different companies, right? From a manufacturing to the marketing to the sales. And you have to really do everything here. So when I think about Anuvia, everything we build today is the culture that will be here, I always say 20 years from now, right? So everything you do, you have to kind of think deliberately about, so that when you go ahead with it, even though it's you're small, it really does set the stage, right? When you hire on employees, how employees do their job, the type of employees that you hire when you bring them on. And I think as a small company, the other thing that you have to be ready to do is pivot, because you don't have the resources to be able to run everything to ground. I mean, I don't have, when we started, we didn't have 600 data sets that I would have had at a bigger company, right? We would have done that R&D work for 15 years before we would have launched it. And we would have known, we had the founders, they did their data, we needed more data. And then we kind of made calls based on what we saw and then pivoted along the way, right? So that we could stay on track, but that we were really following what the science is. And it is, to me, that's probably one of the hardest parts. That, and you're constantly raising capital. You don't have enough capital because it never happens quick enough. You never, because you'll always be pushed to do things a little bit faster so you can get the returns for the people that are investing. So you just have to constantly be thinking about how you're going to raise capital and how you're going to have these quick wins and get to where you need to be. Those things to me are really challenging, right? As well as everything you set up is the future. So if you set up a culture that's command and control, that's what you're going to have, right? And if you want to switch it to be more empowered people, you've hired command and control people. So you have to really think about that when you're moving ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. I thought culture would have been such a major thing, for instance. And tell me a little bit about the culture you've tried to kind of imbue in the organization then, and how you would describe Anuvia from a cultural viewpoint.
How I would describe Anuvia is the people that we're hiring, I always tell them when they come on, is that startups aren't easy, right? So if you're thinking that you're going to come in and this is going to be similar to where maybe we're head of transportation of something and you worked in this one single piece, that is not going to happen here, right? I'm just being real honest. So I need people that have a good knowledge base of what we're hiring them for, and also are not afraid to roll up their sleeves. And this is really important because, many times if you bring in an executive, they might have a staff of analysts, they might have a staff of marketing people, they might have this. You don't have that here, right? We have like one administrative assistant person who's kind of our jack of all trades. So you have to be willing to do a lot of your own and not be afraid to do that. Now, saying that, when you then expand, right? Because remember, we were at 5 and now we're at 200. You also have to know when you've reached the point or the segue when you actually then empower the person to do their job and you no longer are in charge of it, right? So it's a really interesting mix of people that you have, and they shift as your company continues to evolve and to grow. And what I would like to create, or what I'm trying to create, is a culture of empowered people that are empowered to make decisions, that they are accountable for the decisions that they make, because ultimately I believe that is a better culture for everybody to work and thrive in as we continue to grow. And because it's very fast paced, I need that. If everybody's waiting for me to make a decision, and it's going to be taking forever, right? Because you can only do so much in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. You find that in terms of engaging or bringing people either into the organization or aligning them on the mission that you're focused on, really kind of helps kind of define the culture, and the people that are joining you because they believe in the things that you believe in as well when it comes to a healthier and more sustainable world.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. I mean, that's why people are attracted, right? Because we can actually provide that solution that helps make large farmers more sustainable, and they believe in that, right? And that's very important. And that's really what has been one of the drivers on people that have been attracted to come over.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I've been, I suppose, working in the AgTech space for about the last 5 years or so, and working with all sorts of ranges of technologies and organizations that are really kind of disrupting. And really the farmer is at the center of it. And I've never really spoken to a farmer, just to understand from a context of how some of these changes that I'm seeing, at a macro level and working with companies really affects them on the farm actually. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm just curious. There seems to be so much science and technology, and I would imagine a lot of it is quite boggling for the farmer.
It is. I mean, think about it this way. So, my dad and I were just talking about this over Easter because they were down. So when, like when I was little, right? When I was young Amy, as you talk about, when I was little, we had like this one tractor. It was a small tractor, right? And when he would go and plant, he had this really small planter, and it was up to him to kind of go back and forth, right? And we always used to laugh because you always wanted your rows straight so your neighbors, because everyone would drive by. Now, the tractor's bigger, the implement's bigger, it has a GPS on it, so they actually program in the field, so you don't even drive it. And what the farmer really does now, or my brother, is busy monitoring how the seed is going in the ground, is the placement of the fertilizer in the right place. So it's this big, when you sit in the cab, it's this big computer screen with a variety of different monitors that are really monitoring all these pieces of equipment, so that you only go over the field once, so that you don't have to do a lot with soil compaction, right? And because the GPS is there, you're not driving anymore. You're really monitoring. I always look at it as like monitoring its own manufacturing line, and that's really what they do. And that's happened in 30 years. I mean, that's not a long time.
No, it's not. It's not, and quite a big impact in changes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it seems to me that in the industry that we work in, it really is a lot of forces coming together to help solve some of these challenges, that we have over the next 20 years with the growing kind of world's population, as it were, and being able to kind of feed the world sustainably with using less of the kind of resources.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's exciting is just is really the coming together of companies that way. I mean, if you look, you've seen large companies like Nutrien and Corteva and Bayer that have really made strong commitments towards the environment and really thinking about how the activities that they are doing have an impact and starting to shift and go a different way. And I think that tells you that they see what's coming from the general population, as well as they believe it's the right thing to do for the farmer and being in agriculture longer term. Those to me are exciting when you start to get everybody kind of headed in the same direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Also, I remember we spoke about this a few months ago. I was having a look through I think I had about 600 companies, and I was looking at some of the CEO kind of populations for those companies in the ag tech space. I think I noticed that there was less than 5% were females, for instance, and so I was quite amazed at just how few female CEOs there are for ag tech ag tech companies. I'm just wondering, I know you sit on a few boards and associations around this, but whether you're seeing more women progressing or coming into the industry, or whether you find that there's kind of routes out there now for women to be able to kind of progress quickly within the industry.
I'm starting to see it more now than what I did when I was there originally, right? So I was one of the few. I mean, I can remember going to meetings when there was 250 men and me, right? It was easy. There's no lines in the bathroom. That was always a big bonus. But I think now, you know what I mean? So, so now I think the avenues are more open and it's more accepted. People ask me about when I started, and I always say this: you did have to work twice as hard, and you had to not make many mistakes, right? And so if you did, you had to correct them. And the other thing that's really important is I took all those different avenues, and I told you I was very deliberate on, but I also took things that might not have been attractive to a man at the time frame. So for example, when I worked in Monsanto, I had the secondary crops, right? I didn't have corn and soybeans. I had wheat, I had canola, I had some of what they would have considered secondary crops. I did that because that was the opportunity for me to get seen. And what I could do is make that be successful. And then people would notice if you could make something like that successful that they didn't really write off, but they didn't pay a lot of attention to, then they really attribute it to what the accomplishments that you and your team had done. And so those are some things that I had to do much earlier. I think a lot of that is really starting to go by the wayside as more and more women are coming in, and there's just gotten to be a lot more general acceptance. It's still not of an equal population, and I think I'm not sure how much women are encouraged to go into agriculture, right? So that was one of the reasons so Sigma Alpha is a women's sorority that promotes women in agriculture. So I started a chapter when I was at Michigan State, and then I sat on their foundation board for a few years as president. And that was always meant a lot to me, because that was a place that women that had similar viewpoints about getting into ag or animal science or plant science could meet together, and you really could encourage each other to continue to move forward. So I think those organizations like that have helped. And I think that there's been a lot of progress made, but I still think there's some work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, without thinking from women farmers, when you think about on the farm, you think about the farmers, how many women are there? I mean, are there a lot of women farmers, or?
I can actually think of only one, to
Right.
be totally honest. Yeah, there's just not that many. Most of the time it's been the son that has taken over. Not always, but I can think of one right off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, got it. I'd tell you what is quite interesting, with AgTech being seen as a sexy industry to be in now, right? There's a lot of people that were changing, aligning on a mission, doing great things to help combat some of the kind of environmental challenges. I'm seeing it's bringing an influx of people that are really interested in the sector from maybe adjacent sectors, for instance. And you're getting this flow of people from outside the industry coming into it, for instance, and attracted to it. So, I'm hoping and I'm seeing more, what's being asked of me is to find more female talent specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I think it seems that, the landscape is certainly probably more positive when it comes to encouraging females, and developing them, and being hired into more senior positions. So, I'm hoping that we'll see a shift, for instance, and then when 5 years time we're looking at the 700 or 800 companies that I've earmarked, maybe we'll see we should see a higher percentage of female CEOs.
I think you will. I really do. Like I said, a lot of it you have to build up the pool and the experience level. And so until you can get that mid-management level with women, and I see more of that now than, like I said, I did when I started, then that allows you to put that progression in place so people have a place to aspire to and rise to. And I firmly believe that we will get there.
Yeah, no, that is great. And just final couple of things for me, just looking, I know you sit on a number of boards at the moment as well. So, I'm curious as to the differences between, because I think you sit on a couple of public boards, right?
Yeah, two publics, yep.
And non-public. And I was really interested, your perspective on really the differences between kind of both, for instance, for you, and the value that you can really kind of add in both different kind of dynamics, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, in the public boards, to me, what you have is you have a much more standard way of going about it, right? The company's more established, and you have very specific rules that you need to follow, either from the SEC or, what other exchange that you happen to be on, right? I sit on a NASDAQ board and I sit on an NYSE board. So they're both basically the same, some very slight variances. So there's a rigor and I would almost call it system that everybody needs to follow in order to move forward and show your progression. Then that's different from a private company, right? In a private company, you haven't really got the track record to be able to have that. So you don't know what your business cycles are. It's a little more unpredictable. So it becomes harder to forecast what your results will be because you've never really done it before in terms of the business, and you're entering really new. When you're forecasting what you're looking ahead for in a public company and you're giving guidance, you're going off of years of history, so you can kind of pick about where you'll be from that standpoint. I think what I bring to the public boards is really a clarity of thought in terms of the business, right? So, working in ag is very cyclical, right? And so when you think about it, I've been in the business almost 30 years. I've had 30, and if you make a mistake, you only have one time you can do this, right? Because you only plant one time a year, basically. So when you launch something, it has to go well that year, right? If you're not, you have to put a whole nother year behind. It's not like selling a soft drink or something to that effect where people can consume it every day and you can shift and change. And so knowing how to deal with the cycle and the planning to get to that cycle, it really allows me from a public company perspective to give a different viewpoint. And I think that's one of the things that I've added a lot of value on both of my public boards. Also, I'm a really straight shooter, really. And so another comment that often comes back is you cut through the chase in a way that everybody can understand. And for me, it's more about, I just have a lot to do. So I don't need to spend 20 minutes pontificating about this point. Let's just think about it and and kind of crystallize it in a way that we all can understand, and then start to discuss and go to the next level on. And that one I get a lot. So I think that's just a little bit of my style.
Yeah, and it must be richer with the experience that you have doing your day job when you're able to come out of your job and look at other companies, whether it be public or private, and have those different kind of data points to be and experiences to be able to use.
Well, it goes back to making those deliberate choices early, right? And it's one of the reasons I did that. And that served me well personally for what I do, because I can draw upon, when I did a consumer business, I can draw upon when I did a generic business and what it was like to enter the market, what it's been like to do the startup, right? In terms of raising capital and understanding the dynamics of that, right? And all those intertwine, and even in a public atmosphere.
Yeah, no, great. Really good. And Amy, it's been brilliant. Been a lovely conversation. Thanks so much for coming on and joining me today. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Simon, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. You have a great day.
Thank you.